So, welcome back. Our patient, once they've done the physical examination, we now send them to the lab to get some samples done. So the first one is called a sputum sample. Now, the sputum samples, basically the idea is to have the individual cough up some mucus from their lungs. And of course, in the 1900s, the big thing we were worried about, of course, was tuberculosis, or this bacteria that causes tuberculosis. And that was found in the sputum test of their lungs. We asked him for a urine sample, and I guess if we were in Paris, he'd be European. And this is to help us understand a little bit about the kidney function. And finally, because he grew up in the tropics, we asked for a stool sample, and we wanted to see if we could check for parasites. More specifically, obviously, the intestinal worms. And now the results. Our first one, the sputum sample looking for bacteria, turned up negative. So no bacteria is found. He did not have tuberculosis. His urine sample was examined, and it turned out there was some cellular debris. There are some cell parts in the actual urine, and so that's an indication of some kind of kidney damage going on. Finally, the stool sample, they looked for parasites, and we're happy to report they were clean, no parasites. How could a stool sample be clean? That's interesting. And so we sent them to phlebotomy. So today, this is your word of the day. You're to use. Now, obviously, you're kind of going, what's phlebotomy? Well, it's an interesting job. If we told people what they were really going to do, they would not show up. But phlebotomy is the taking of blood. So we wanted to look at what's in their blood. So we would draw blood, and the red blood cell count for an individual who's healthy should be 4 to 6 times 10 to the 6. That's 4 to 6 million cells per milliliter. The hemoglobin content. So hemoglobin is a protein with iron, and we want to know how much is in your blood because hemoglobin carries oxygen. It's 14 to 18 grams of hemoglobin per 100 milliliters of your blood. And finally, we test your white blood cells. White blood cell count tells us if you have an infection. If it's between 4 and 10,000 cells per milliliter, you're okay, no infection. But anything above that would be considered an infection, and anything lower than 4,000 would be considered something immunodeficient. So our patient, he had 2.6 times 10 to the 6, or 2 million cells per milliliter, far less than we had expected. His hemoglobin content was at 8 grams, very, very low, and his white blood cell count was at 15,000, so definitely had an infection, which kind of corresponds to the swollen lymph nodes. And so under the microscope, this is what they looked at of his blood. So normally your blood has this nice donut circles, but our patient's blood started doing this under the microscope. And this is not normal. Those cells are changing shape. And so that's his blood cells under the microscope. Let's do that one more time so you can see that. So watching carefully, you can see how those cells, which should be round, are changing shape. And that is definitely unusual. So go ahead and answer the questions in your Google form.